theater world. They're all artsy. So I thought, theater
Alright.
and like artsy and stuff. So I was like, okay, I'm a creative. We can
Now
get
we
along
just
there.
need
Like
to
I'm tolerant,
see
you know.
what kind of
But they are
volume
not.
we have.
They're not tolerant. I didn't even speak honestly about my thoughts on anything. I kept my mouth so shut, and they
Check.
could still figure out that I was
Check 1, 2. Check.
that I was not one of them.
Keep talking.
And like normal
Normal voice.
Well, anyway, 5G warfare. Isn't that funny that it's 5G like we've been talking about?
Okay, I think.
Isn't that interesting?
Actually, 5GW.
5G, yes, of course it's 5GW.
Folks, if you could just let me know
Have you
if the
seen-
volumes are
have you
good.
seen
We've got
the-
2 different microphones
have you-
running.
Have you seen the title?
You can
of the
just
book?
text
Did you
and
know
just
Mike Flynn
make
had
sure
a
that you can
book
hear them
about that?
both as adequately as possible.
Mike Flynn.
Mike Flynn.
Mike Flynn just released a book on 5G warfare, fifth generation warfare.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're testing the mic?
I just had some mic, yeah.
It's kind of an echo.
Paul's listening. Yeah. There is because it's coming out of the thing there
I didn't know
as
that.
well.
All,
So that's wild. So
Okay,
you're
I
that's
think-
yes. So then this is like things are all lining up here, talking on the same thing, and he's just releasing it. So
Check 1, 2.
yeah,
And I don't follow war.
right, right. Who does? Really? I mean, it's pretty rare to take an interest in.
I mean, I'm interested in history,
Yeah.
so
Audio check.
two things generally in my name, but
Yeah.
I'm not a military person.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, we're
What else
good.
can I? We're good. You sure? All that echoing is just my phone.
Maybe I should have had
Paul?
a military career.
All the.
this, but we are experiencing technical difficulties. Please do not adjust your set.
Okay, let me know if that works, guys.
Can you hear us now out there
Hopefully that works.
in TV land?
We'll know in like 10 seconds before they actually
Somebody
see the
will.
stream.
Somebody will respond. Can you hear us?
Let's just wait for confirmation here. We should be seeing people type that they can hear us. There was sound at first, it said, now none, but you know, I just went and changed the microphone settings on the phone. Okay, we're heard. We're heard.
You can hear us. Good. Yeah,
Yeah,
how
let's
did
figure
you
out
hear
what they
that?
heard last. Well,
Okay, it doesn't matter. So
yeah,
the key thing is, beginning of 2021, after following the news of what was going on during 2020, and nothing made sense, right? Like, you guys out there know, nothing made sense. And the question everybody's been asking themselves, me also, throughout all of 2020, what the hell's going on? Really? Because what we're being told is, like, it can't be true. It makes no sense. The story just doesn't hang together. So then I realized, okay, I can't put this into even a series of blog posts. I'm going to have to write a book, but it'll just be a short book, maybe 30,000 words, a little booklet sort of thing. Well, 200,000 words later, I was finished the first draft. One of my first beta readers said, split it into 4 books.
right.
But it's hard enough to get people to buy 1 book. So I said, no, I got to make it shorter. I threw some things out. And of course, so that was the first draft in the spring of 2021. So it was almost a year and a half after that.
Before it was even
Before it was published, and,
Yeah.
and 7 drafts. And it's much, much better now than the first draft. I got to admit, the first draft was terrible. But it's a good book now.
You have,
So-
this is a principle of wisdom, though. In order to get good at something, you have to start bad at something.
Yeah.
You have to be bad at it.
Yeah.
You just practice it. You get better at it.
Yeah.
This isn't even going to be your last book.
Oh, I hope not. No, I'll be writing till I die, another 30 or 40 years from now.
Yeah.
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 So anyway. Yeah.
Awesome. So one of the things that looking at the outline of the book, I recognize some of the principles of behavioral, recognizing patterns.
Yes.
That's something that we do as well when we're wanting to make an improvement on our lives. We have to recognize what are the patterns. Where do I not have integrity, and how do I improve on that so that these patterns don't keep recurring?
Yeah.
Well, you really focus on that. One of the first, it's the first whole section of the book. Expand.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the book are for our audience. Will be things that you know, right? But there are some really important things that I put into the book that I don't hear anybody else talking about. Only in the last week or so have I finally begun to hear a few people talk about pattern recognition. Mm-hmm. See, pattern recognition, this is what every intelligence agent does. This is what every police detective does. This is what artificial intelligence programs do, right? They look for patterns, and when they recognize a pattern, they say, yeah, this is the pattern. This is a known pattern, right? And I mean, it's a lot like the old saying that everybody's heard, right? If it looks like a duck, it flies like a duck, it swims like a duck, it quacks like a duck. Hey, it's not a spaceship. Mm-hmm. It's a duck.
Yeah.
Right? There's a point at which you say, okay, there's enough evidence that fits this pattern. I know this is the duck, and it's not, like I say, a spaceship, but it's not even a goose, right? You can, people who know ducks from geese can tell, okay, this fits the pattern of a duck, not a goose. You can distinguish. So, I give the example. Start off with the example. Okay, there's an old sitcom scene that has stuck in my mind. You know how that is sometimes, little scenes from movies or from your life from 30 or 40 years ago that just, you remember them and you think, why the heck am I remembering that when I can't remember what I'm supposed to pick up at the grocery store? But anyway, there's this scene, and it's a doctor's office, and sometimes doctors run into patients who diagnose themselves, right? And they tell jokes about this too. But this patient is sitting in the doctor's office, waxing eloquent with his self-diagnosis, and the doctor's kind of half listening to him and half looking at an x-ray in his hand. And the patient stops for a minute, take a breath, and the doctor says, "You're pretty knowledgeable. What do you think of this x-ray?" And he hands him the x-ray. And the patient looks at it for about 1 second and says authoritatively, "That's a compound fracture of the tibia." and hands it back to the doctor. The doctor kind of chuckles, really, you think so, huh? Actually, that's a perfectly healthy set of lungs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny to think, well, how could somebody mistake legs for lungs? And probably none of us would do that because we've seen pictures of lungs and we've seen X-ray pictures of legs. But so what do we know about that? Well, an X-ray photograph is a picture in shades of black and white, light and dark.
Right.
So obviously the patient, he wasn't stupid. Technically, he was ignorant.
Right.
He wasn't familiar with that pattern,
Mm-hmm.
even though he thought he was, right? So even though he was looking right at the picture, he didn't understand what he was seeing. And so he mistook it for something else.
Right.
And that's what's going on in our whole world. All of us, we're looking at the events of the world, but we haven't been taught the patterns. And so we don't recognize. We're looking right at these events, but we don't really see or understand what's going on because we're not familiar with the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So much of the book is teaching you, okay, here's the pattern. Here's the pattern of communist subversion. Here's what they do. Yuri Bezmenov, famous KGB defector in the 1970s, and wrote a book, lived out, eventually he defected to the United States, but lived most of the rest of his life in Canada, actually. And he essentially wrote down, this is the KGB operating manual. This is how we subvert countries all over the world. This is the communist subversion program. And so I've summarized that in one chapter. This is what they do. Do you recognize any of this? Now once you know, oh, that's a pattern. This is not what we're seeing. It's not just the normal evolution of a society. No, it's communist subversion.
Right. Yeah.
Once you recognize it, okay, I see that pattern. I see that pattern over and over and over in all these things. And as Yuri Bezmenov says, the purpose of, he uses several terms for it, but the one he uses most commonly is active measures. But he also says this is psychological warfare. This is subversion. All of these are interchangeable. He said the purpose of active measures is to make you I have the correct quote in the book, but I can't remember the words exactly. Essentially, so that you don't understand the you don't see the subversion.
Right. Make it covert as possible.
Even though it's going on, well, it's almost all overt.
Right.
But you don't recognize it as subversion
until you know the pattern.
Yeah.
Right.
And even if you recognize it as subversion, you don't understand that it's planned. And so you're unable to come to make logical decisions in your own best interests and in the best interest of your country. That's the whole thing. And so what we're seeing, we see this stuff and the mainstream media tells us, oh, this is happening, right? That's not what's happening.
Right.
They're trying to, look over here. It's like the old magician's trick, right? Distract your attention to the left hand. Well, the trick happens unnoticed in the right hand, right?
Yeah.
Oh, look over here. Oh, what do you know? A handkerchief, a pigeon, or whatever, a rabbit. Where did that come from?
Climate change,
right? This is that distract your attention to other things. So patterns are so important. So the pattern of communist subversion and the pattern of fraud. Pattern of fraud is really so I talk about, when I introduce that, I use the Great Bre-X fraud as an example. And many people who are my age or close to my age might remember the Bre-X fraud. It was a Canadian gold exploration company, headquarters in Calgary. It's stock traded in the Toronto Stock Exchange. It had real investors. It was doing real exploration and drilling in Indonesia. And Indonesia might seem like far away and a strange place, but Indonesia is actually home to one of the largest, highest grade and most profitable gold mines in the world. So the geology made sense, had real money, real investors doing real drilling, like everything looked above board. And as they released their drilling results over a period of years, it gradually became obvious that they had discovered one of the world's largest and richest undeveloped gold properties. And so the shares went from pennies per share to $100, $200. I don't remember what they exactly went up to, but I mean, a few people made lots and lots of money.
Right.
But in the end, most people lost their life savings. And that's a key thing. So how was the fraud discovered? Because they ultimately had more or less duped almost all the gold mining experts in the world, all the gold stock analysts, right?
Wow.
So everybody eventually kind of, after some resistance for some time, people said, no, this isn't as good as it looks, etc. Basically, almost the whole gold mining community was brought around to believing that this was the greatest,
Yeah.
undeveloped gold property of the last half century. So what exposed the fraud? It wasn't any of these experts. That's really important. What exposed the fraud was actually the company that at that time at least owned and ran the big Grasberg mine, the gold mine in Indonesia. They entered into a joint venture with Bre-X to develop the deposit into a mine. But they didn't accept any of Bre-X's evidence. They drilled their own drill holes right beside the Bre-X drill holes, did their own assays, their own analysis. And they said, what gold? There's no gold, nothing. It was all faked. It turned out to be the greatest example of the oldest gold mining fraud trick in the books. They salted the assays. Right? So when you're doing a mining exploration, you drill down into the rocks, you pull out core samples, you take sections, little sections of that, grind it into a powder, send it off to a laboratory to analyze for its metals content, right? Gold, silver, etc., whatever metals you happen to be looking for. So when salting an assay, you simply drop a little gold dust into the ground up rock before you send it to the lab. Now, it helped, as with all of the frauds in the book, it helps that these things are far away and hard to check, right? It's in the middle of the jungles in Indonesia, right? So when they sent their assays to the lab with the rocks already ground up and everything, it was very difficult for other people to go and actually check the evidence, right? So that's how they did it.
It was a good setup for them.
Yeah, that's how, it was the chief geologist, Michael de Guzman, right? Who did this. And he was very meticulous about it. Like, it wasn't just, dump a bunch in here, dump a bunch in there. No, he made it look like a perfectly normal mineral deposit, right? So there wasn't like nothing in this sample and lots in this sample. No, it was, you could see it. You could model the deposit and everything, and it made sense geologically.
He knew how to make it look legit.
He knew how to make it look real, even though it was complete fantasy. So all of the people who invested in it, right, eventually bought into this fantasy. It turned out to be a fantasy, but they believed it was reality. And that's exactly what all frauds are like.
Right.
You convince people of a certain alternate reality that isn't reality at all. It's fantasy. So a couple lessons. That's one. You get convinced of a fantasy that is not reality. Number two is it's not experts that reveal a fraud.
Right.
It's evidence. And I hammer on that all the way through the book. In every chapter, I look at all of the frauds. I say, okay, let's look at the evidence. Let's look at the evidence. What does the evidence tell us?
Does it confirm the experts?
Yeah, people can lie, but evidence does. Physical evidence doesn't lie.
Yeah.
And so, and another lesson is, it doesn't take very many people to commit fraud. It may well be that Michael de Guzman, the chief geologist, was the only one in Bre-X who knew what was going on.
Right.
Even the president later said, I didn't know any of this. And he was charged. He was eventually acquitted of the charge.
They couldn't prove that he was a part of it. Yeah.
And he honestly said, I didn't know.
Wow.
Well, they know because they're just drilling.
They're just pulling up cores.
Yeah, they don't know the people there. Right. Yeah. So in that case, it could well have been only one person who actually knew about the fraud. But thousands of people were drawn into this. They were, in terms of communist ideology, they were useful idiots. Right? All the stock market analysts, all the mining geologists, and the gold mining experts around, they were all drawn in to this fantasy because there appeared to be evidence supporting it
Right.
until somebody else went and actually checked the evidence right at the source. So there's some really important, that's why I use that as an example of fraud.
Yeah.
And you know, we can take that to, most of the book is focused on 4 big frauds, all characterized as wars. And this is psychologically important, which we'll touch on in a couple of minutes. But the wars on drugs, the war on terror, the war on the climate, and the war on the virus. They're all frauds. And they're all designed to draw power and money, but mostly power in these cases. With BRIACs, it was mainly about money. Business frauds are typically mainly about money. These frauds are mainly about power.
Right.
Collecting power and control into fewer and fewer hands. And so when we look through that lens, we look through that perspective at these frauds and say, okay, what does the climate fraud accomplish? What does the COVID fraud accomplish? What does the terrorism fraud accomplish?
Right.
And
not even based on what someone thinks is being accomplished, but looking at the data, we know what they've accomplished.
yeah, absolutely. You can look
Yeah.
at the absolute results, actual results. And this, you know, brings up another point of, you know, what I call they're liars, not idiots. You know, all of us have heard so many people say, these people are idiots.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
all our politicians are idiots. All of the world's leaders are all
Yeah.
idiots. This is the most idiotic crop of leaders the world has ever known. And I realized long ago, no, that's not possible. It's like Sherlock Holmes always says, right? If you remove what is impossible, whatever remains, however improbable,
Yeah.
must be the truth.
Yeah.
Now, as a statement of logic, it's not exactly correct.
Right.
But as a statement of principle, it makes a lot of sense. We cannot continue to hold to what is impossible,
Right.
right? So
Especially when we've ruled out their scenario of truth.
exactly. When we
Yeah.
know, okay, you know, black is white. Okay, no,
Yeah.
it's not.
We literally went.
That's impossible.
Yeah, we literally took the role of taking core samples right next to where
Yeah.
they said that they got theirs. And what do you know? We're finding
No gold.
very different data.
Yeah, no gold.
Yeah. You know,
So-
I love how you say, you know, how the fraud comes about. And there's a saying that I like that ties in with evil, with this: evil is deception mastered. And we know that if people are deceived, which the vast majority of people are deceived,
Yeah.
that gives us an idea of just how evil these people are.
Yeah.
Because they got it down to a science.
Yeah. Well, they've been practicing for decades
Yeah.
and maybe even centuries. I don't
Maybe
know,
even
but,
longer,
but
yeah.
definitely decades.
Well,
right?
they certainly have far too much running, or far too much to lose to just pull this together in a few years.
Oh,
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
There's no
because,
way. There's no way.
When the frauds I go back to, like the drug fraud.
Yeah.
You know, I in the chapter on drugs, I go back to basically the Second World War.
Mm-hmm.
One could go back further. In fact, well, I do because it's such a good pattern.
Yeah.
I mentioned like the great the British East India Company
Mm-hmm.
and the whole opium
Right.
you know, fraud that it wasn't really fraud because they were quite open about it. No, we're
Right.
selling you opium. It's going to addict you, destroy your life, destroy your communities, destroy your civilization. We're to steal all your money, and you're gonna it wasn't really fraud in that case because they were open about it.
Yeah,
We're gonna destroy you with this drug.
Yeah.
But yeah, the same pattern then got repeated in the 20th century.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yet the liars not idiots. That I first started to realize this about a quarter of a century ago. I finished my economics degree in 1990, and the area of most interest to me was monetary policy. I mean, I just lived through the great inflation of the 1970s. And in the 1980s, when I was working on my economics degree, I did a lot of reading about that whole experience. There's a famous Canadian economist that wrote a whole series of books actually about the Canadian experience and what the Bank of Canada did and what went wrong, why they got so messed up, how this all happened. It was great. And So when I graduated, and then of course, some people will remember back in about 81, might even have been as early as 80, but certainly 81, Paul Volcker was appointed to be the chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. And he cranked interest rates way up high, right? Higher than the rate of inflation, which took mortgage rates up into the high teens, in some cases up to like 20% mortgage rates.
Yeah, I remember.
And like I remember friends of mine at the time, a little older than me, because I didn't own a house yet at that time, but friends of mine who were a little bit older, and people were just who had bought their houses in this boom. We've just gone through a housing boom, right? Bought their houses in this boom. Both the husband and wife had jobs. Then the Great Recession came, and many people were on either short-term mortgages that reset or variable interest rate mortgages that immediately went up high. And, they had good jobs in the oil patch. Well, the oil patch collapsed. Both husband and wife lost their jobs. Their mortgage rates tripled.
Yeah.
The price of their house fell that they'd bought with 5% down.
Right.
Right? They had no equity in it. They are underwater, no jobs. Like just so many people take the keys or the bank. There you go. It's all yours. Like I can't pay. I can't.
Yeah.
There's nothing I can do. Sorry, it's your house now. It took a decade,
Right.
actually a little more than a decade, for the Alberta real estate market to come out of that.
To recover from the
and as I
repercussions.
go into in I think it's chapter 18 in the book when I talk about currency fraud and financial fraud that's going on now, and the inevitable financial collapse that we are facing at some point in the very near future. I think that the real estate market may not recover in the rest of my lifetime.
Correct.
We will be decades. And I compare a little bit to Japan, like their real estate and their big bubble popped, I think, in 87, maybe 88. Prices have not got back. It's over 30 years ago now. Real estate prices are not back to what they were there. The stock market is not back. It might never, even in this 21st century. So bubbles go that way, and we've created an everything bubble. But it was in the late 1990s that, coming from this experience of being interested in monetary policy and understanding about inflation and money supply and all this kind of stuff, that I started seeing central bankers and monetary authorities around the Western world start to behave strangely in the late 1990s. Interest rates gradually came down from the peak of the early 1980s, and inflation rates gradually came down. But by about the mid 1990s, then interest rates got too low.
Right.
And it was obviously sparking another boom. Now we call it the dot-com bubble, right? And the chairman of the Federal Reserve at that time, Alan Greenspan, right? It's impossible that they didn't know that they were doing it.
Oh, yeah.
It's impossible. And he came out with this much repeated and now famous expression that, stock market participants are showing irrational exuberance. And I thought, Alan, it's not irrational exuberance. It's ultra low interest rates. That's what causes a bubble. You must know this. It's not possible. That's where I started to realize.
Even if he
these
doesn't,
people have to know.
Yeah, and this is the thing that I was saying, like in 2017, 18, when I was talking to people about the monetary system. Even if he didn't know, the number of people on payroll paid to advise him on these things, well, surely one of them would have known.
Yeah,
because it's basic math. It's basic math. We know what happens when they do those things.
Yeah.
To say or suggest that the opposite's going to happen, this time around is just
this time is different,
lunacy.
right?
Yeah,
the famous saying. This time is different.
It's kind of like Marxists and communists. Well, that wasn't real communism.
I've heard that my whole life.
Yeah.
That's right. It wasn't real they just didn't do it right.
Yeah,
right?
it wasn't quite right.
I need to be the dictator. And
Yeah.
then it will be
everything will be fine.
I'll get it right.
But now,
Andrew.
one thing that I really value that you bring forward throughout the book is the connection of what these liars are doing to our spirituality as well. This isn't just a war for our health. This isn't just a war on drugs. This isn't just a war on the climate change. We have got something even more bigger, even overarching all of those things when it comes to our consciousness.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I present in the book, say, you know, you can understand the spiritual aspect of this war from whatever, from wherever you're coming from, right? Whatever your
religion,
whatever your
denomination,
religion, your spiritual understanding, you know, you can, and I go through, okay, if you're a Hindu, you can understand it in this way. If you're Christian, you can understand it in this way. If you kind of are an atheist and have, you know, no kind of spiritual or religious understanding at all, you can understand it simply in terms of psychology. Mm-hmm. And so I, in fact, the very first chapter goes through that and says, okay, here's various ways you can understand what's going on. But, you know, I include this interesting, fascinating little story and quote in the book, the connection, because what's going on in the world connects with spiritual reality in so many ways, on so many levels. But there's the story of, I think it was I forget the year, late 70s, Alexander Solzhenitsyn was awarded the Templeton Prize, and it was a ceremony in London, I believe it was. And so he was, of course, asked or invited to come and speak as he was awarded this prize. And he said, I won't get the quote exactly right, but I'll get it pretty close. He said, 60 years ago, and maybe I should just back up a minute for those of you who might not know, Alexander Solzhenitsyn is a Russian historian, a critic of communism, was eventually expelled from the Soviet Union, and I think he was expelled in 1974. And because they couldn't kill him, they had thrown him in the you know, as a political prisoner. He spent several years as a political prisoner in the gulags, and they called them gulags, just like the gulag number 1, number 2, et cetera, just like the prisoner of war camps that the Germans had during the Second World War. They called them Stalag, right? Stalag 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, et cetera. So there was this gulag, and they were stretched all across Siberia, essentially all across northern Russia. And so his famous kind of book called the Gulag Archipelago, because it's like it's like an archipelago of islands strung across Siberia, all these basically political prisoner camps. And he spent some years there. But because of his very famous, he became famous because some of his books were translated into English and other languages, published in the West. So he had an international profile that the Soviets couldn't just murder him. So they threw him out of the country in 1974. And then he was later awarded the Templeton Prize. So when he got up, he said, when I was a young man, and older people at the time asked themselves, why has this terrible disaster befallen Russia? This communism thing that destroyed 60 million of their own people. Why has all this happened? And old people said, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. And if I were to summarize today why this all happened, I could not come to a more accurate and concise statement as to repeat, men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Mm-hmm. And that will seem so strange as to be unbelievable for many people. How can there be a connection between God or spirituality in a general sense and communism and what happens? So much of the book then tries to explain that connection. And, you know, we have, most of you who are listening here, if you have any religious background at all, it probably is in Christianity, and you know something of the Bible. And Jesus says many, many times that know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And I make that point. In fact, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I quote that as well, when he was thrown out of the Soviet Union in 1974, he wrote a farewell essay to his countrymen titled, Live Not by Lies. And he explains that communism is a system of lies. It's a web of lies. And if you stop going along with the lies, the whole system will collapse. And that takes is one of the main kind of spiritual and simple ways that we escape from this. Live not by lies. Stop going along with lies. Don't accept them from your grocery store when they say, oh, you got to do this. No, that's a lie, right? Your employer, oh, you got to get jabbed with this. No, that's a lie. You know, all throughout our life, now we're told the most ridiculous, unbelievable things, right? Oh, men can have babies. No, that's a lie.
I saw a headline today. I showed it to Taya. It said that microplastics may have beneficiary fibers. And so it's okay that they're in our diet. Because just
I'm pretty sure that's a lie.
how much, but it just boggles my mind on how much people are willing to accept. The fact that they wrote it means that they know that it's going to get some attraction. It's going to get traction.
Yeah. And look at all the other ridiculous things that are coming out now. Oh, yeah, children with myocarditis. We've always had that.
Oh, yeah. That's
no,
common.
that's a lie.
Yeah, it's been going on for years.
Oh, young people have always just dropped dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Especially, yeah.
This never happened in my growing up. I mean, I had kids in school killed in car accidents,
Right.
Drug overdoses, like all kinds of, but nobody dropped dead. Nobody died in their sleep.
Oh, sports athletes movies have this happen.
Well, I think I actually saw an article in Global News saying that people that don't remember how kids had myocarditis are sociopaths or something like that.
We should all go in for a psychiatric analysis
Yeah.
and go on SSRIs, which have now been shown to be that serotonin levels actually have nothing to do with depression. But they're still selling. They're still making millions of dollars every year selling, right? For those who might not know, this is a recent meta-analysis a few months back, right? SSRIs like Prozac, all these drugs that are given to people who are these antidepressant drugs. They're in a class called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? And they're supposed to kind of boost your serotonin levels, and serotonin is supposed to make us happy, so we're not depressed. Turns out there actually is no scientific evidence at all that there's a relationship between serotonin levels and happiness or depression. So, So they keep telling you, oh yeah, take this drug, you won't be depressed.
Live by the lie. Live by the lie. Live by the lie.
What the evidence tells us, and read Dr. Peter Bregan's books, right? Talking back to Prozac and other ones, what they are, and what's demonstrated by the research evidence over and over and over is that they increase suicides.
Right.
One of my former students, during the COVID lockdowns, right, when he couldn't get a summer job, put on antidepressants, committed suicide. Like, when he was in my band classes, he was not depressed.
Right.
And then, a year after he graduates from high school, all of a sudden, he's dead. What the hell is going on? Things were not like this before.
Right. So now having that contrast, recognizing the patterns, right, like you talk about in the first chapters, that lends to the question, okay, so what's the goal? Like if they're that bent on lying that much, and they're not even trying to hide the patterns, really. I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? They're wanting us to be prisoners in our own homes. They're wanting to, increase the regulations and all that. There's this ideology that they live by that they are absolutely driven, committed to, and hell-bent on bringing about.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they wouldn't be doing all of this. Yeah. So that's kind of where, like, what is this thing that they're wanting? Yeah. That they're willing to go to all these lengths to, like, even commit crimes to accomplish.
Yeah. Yeah. So we see this pattern, and maybe I should explain this. Those of you who are here with us in person, how many of you have heard of Matthias Desmet and his ideas of mass formation? Some yeses, some no's. Okay, I thought that almost everybody knew, but I guess not. So I talked about this in my book because it was over a year ago when I first heard Matthias Desmet. And man, dots got connected in my mind. Oh, that's what's going on. That explains it. It was so helpful to me. And I've heard him in many interviews. He published a book, early summer, late spring, and I have his book. I haven't got all the way through it. But Matthias Desmet is a professor of psychology at the University of Ghent in Belgium. His area of specialty is this area that he calls mass formation, which also goes by a couple other names, crowd formation, because it's the psychology of crowds. It comes out of this understanding of the psychology of crowds. And all of us have probably experienced this on some level or another. You know, you get a bunch of boys together and they'll do things that none of those boys would do individually. Right? I mean, I did this, man. When I was a kid, we'd go raiding gardens around here, right? And, you know, we rarely ate the vegetables we ripped. Usually we just, you know, I look back on that, and even at the time, you know, after you go home, the next day you think, like, why did I do that? You know, I was just, well, the guys were doing it, and hey, let's raid. So, you know, I did things as a boy with other boys that I would never have done by myself. Right. And I look back on it as an adult, I think, oh, go to confession, you know, whatever, right on your knees, pilgrim, you know, ask for forgiveness. And I think, so, but this is a common phenomenon. All of us do this. Get a group of people together in any kind of a form, and you tend to do things that you wouldn't do individually. And it's particularly true in what we call a mob, right? You get this mob mentality going, and sometimes mobs kill people. You know, murder people. And so there's a whole branch of psychology that looks at this whole phenomenon. What's going on with people when they behave this way? And this is that branch of psychology that Matthias Desmet has particularly focused on. And he calls it mass formation. And there's, I won't go into a lot of details about it here, but there's some conditions that have to be met before mass formation can occur. And there's some things that have to happen, but in a general sense, there has to be a high level of anxiety amongst people, and he calls it free-floating anxiety. So people don't really know what they're anxious about.
They just know they're supposed to be anxious.
Well, not that they're supposed to be, but they are.
Okay.
You know, and for instance, when I first heard him talk about this, I thought, okay, that connects another dot for me, because in the last few years that I was teaching, I retired from teaching in 2019? Yeah, it was 2019. And for the last few years of my teaching, you know, our principal and vice principal would often remind us teachers, oh, you know, like, be gentle with the children. The kids are under so much stress these days. And I thought, what? What are you talking about? How can they be under stress? Like, almost none of these kids are doing half the things I did when I was in high school.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I
mean, I was doing a whole bunch more stuff. We had things going on. We had drugs when I was in high school. They have drugs now. I mean, like, what's the deal? Why? How can this possibly be? I've learned a little bit more about why that might be since then. But yeah. So there's this anxiety, and people aren't really aware of what they're anxious about. So there is free-floating anxiety. So he says, if then someone comes along in some sort of position of authority, right, who presents an explanation, an idea, a narrative that allows people to take their free-floating anxiety and focus that on something that he calls an object of anxiety. And I say, oh, that's why I feel this way. It's because of that. Right. And they're able to focus their anxiety on a certain thing. And if then also the narrative proposes, well, this is what we need to do, proposes a solution. We need to get rid of this object of anxiety. Then people are able to join together into this noble crusade and fight against the object of anxiety. And they develop a sense of belonging. And so this operates on a psychological level. It's very important to understand this has nothing to do with intellect or cognition. It's psychological. And we are all psychological beings. However much we might think we're rational, logical beings, the emotional, psychological part of us is far more powerful. It's rooted in the very primitive part of our brain, the amygdala, and other parts of the very primitive part of our brain. Whereas our logical, rational mind is the prefrontal cortex mostly. It's a much more recent evolutionary development, not nearly as strong. Psychological forces are very powerful in our lives, even though we aren't cognitively attuned to that. So this is a psychological phenomenon. It's fulfilling a psychological need in people. And so he said and so people are able to go along with this. So this has happened before every totalitarian takeover of the 20th century. The Nazis, the fascists, the Bolsheviks,
Right.
all of them, right? And they all begin. So this narrative that says, oh, this is the problem. It's always an ideology.
Right.
And usually the ideology is a quasi-scientific ideology. So in the example of the Nazis, right, it was eugenic race theory.
Right.
And social Darwinism. These ideas were very, very popular amongst intellectuals a century ago. They've been discredited now, mainly because the Nazis actually took those ideas and put them into practice.
Right.
But before they were put into practice, they were common ideas amongst the intelligentsia throughout the whole Western world. So Hitler said, it's the Jews. That's why we lost the war. That's why we have all this inflation. It's the Jewish bankers who are responsible. They're unclean. They're causing diseases. A lot of people don't know that. That Hitler started off, and he was very popular when he cleaned up. We got to get the rats out of our cities. We've got to get the diseases and stuff out of our factories and diseases. And he brought in laws to clean this up, to increase. These were sanitation laws, right? And then he brought in, like, we need to remove the useless eaters. He didn't have that term, but they went through the mental institutions and killed the mental patients. What do we have now in Canada? We have this supposedly kind thing that called MAID, right? And now it's the 6th leading cause of death now in Canada.
6th.
6th leading cause of death. I just read that in the last week. Okay, and now you may or may not know, right, that currently you don't even have to have a terminal condition to have them kill you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's just a mental condition.
Well, but I mean, you can have some kind of like whatever. I have an ingrown toenail. I'm using it as an example, but like your medical condition does not need to be one.
No, it doesn't have to be serious. Right. Yeah.
Okay. And now, so they're expanding it now to include depression, to include poverty,
And infants and children.
and that's right. Yeah, and they're also saying they're using the same kind of principle, this legal whatever it is. This is legal nonsense. They call them like, what do they call them? Mature adolescents or something. Oh, you don't need your parents' permission to get an abortion, to get a vaccine, and now you won't need your parents' permission to get to have someone kill you, right? If you're under 18, this is bizarre, and especially when you include poverty. Oh, now you're too poor to support yourself. Don't worry, we'll kill you.
Yeah.
This is exactly what the Nazis did.
Yeah.
So the Nazis, they blamed the Jews, they blamed the bankers, and okay, so one of the important things to understand here, and I've added this understanding to what Matthias Desmond explains, and this is that these objects of anxiety that we are kind of directed to place our anxiety on, say, this is the problem, we need to get rid of this. They're all things that do not have an existence in material reality. And this touches on the very spiritual aspect. You cannot fight against or destroy anything that does not have a material existence.
Right.
Ideas do not have a material existence. They exist in our mind, but they do not exist in a material form. Right? Theories do not exist in material form. Concepts and even categories. Now, this might seem strange to a lot of people, but philosophers have understood this for thousands of years. You can go back to philosophers from thousands of years ago, and this was clearly understood, that individual examples of things like this chair. I'm sitting on a chair. You're sitting on a chair. Everybody's sitting on some kind of a chair. There are billions of chairs in the world. All of us understand what is a chair. All of us understand the concept of a chair, but only the individual chairs exist.
Right.
The category that we call chairs does not exist in material reality.
Right.
Right? Do you have 8 chairs in your pocket? Can you show me your chairs and I'll show you my chairs? No, I can show you this chair.
Right.
This individual chair that exists in material reality, but the category itself is a mental construct. It's an idea. And we use mental constructs all the time. We wouldn't be able to exist without them. But it's important to understand they do not exist in material reality. I can destroy this chair, but I cannot destroy
The chairs.
chairs.
Right. Yeah.
The chairs, right?
Yeah.
So when Hitler said, we've got to do something about the Jews, Jews are a category.
Right.
You cannot destroy a category, but we can destroy individuals. I can call you a Jew and we can destroy you. We can exclude you from society. We can take away all your assets, your money, your house. And we can strip you of all your clothes and pull out the teeth that have gold fillings in them. And then we can kill you as an individual person, but we cannot kill the Jews. And it's the same with all these frauds. We can never destroy terrorism.
Right.
We can't, but these are all wars. So we have a war on drugs. It's not possible to win a war on drugs.
Right.
We have a war on terrorism. Terrorism is the tactic. It is a concept.
It's another ideology.
You can no more have a war on terrorism than you can have a war on frontal assaults,
Right.
on flanking actions,
Yeah.
on artillery barrages, on air support, right? You cannot have a war on those things, right? They do not exist in material reality. They are concepts. We have a war on the climate.
Yeah.
It's not possible. It's a mental concept. But what can we do? Oh, you're producing too much carbon. We can take away your right to travel outside your own city. We can take away your car. We can take away your ability to buy a hamburger because there's too much carbon emissions involved. We can constrict, just like Hitler did to the Jews. Limit their freedoms, then take away more and more and more, and finally kill them. Same thing with the virus. Can we destroy a virus? No. But we can say, you're unvaxxed. You're a threat. We need to separate you from society. We need to do this to you. So people, individual people can be destroyed. And that's why we see this pattern over and over and over. So I've added on to what Matthias Desmond says. We always start with an ideology that leads to mass formation, that leads to totalitarianism in this noble struggle to overcome the object of anxiety, but we can never defeat that object of anxiety because it doesn't actually have a material existence. But we can kill individual people, and so we start killing people. And so totalitarianism always leads to mass murder.
Right.
Always. And we look around at the totalitarian regimes of the world, and it's going on today.
No, I've said.
In China.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The mass murder continues. So what's coming to the Western world? Okay, we have these ideologies that have led to mass formation, that are leading to greater and greater totalitarian control, that will lead to mass formation. I quote the Canadian philosopher Stefan Molyneux, and he said, cancel culture is a dress rehearsal for mass murder. And he's exactly right. He said, if you are okay with people being disappeared from social media, you'll be okay with them disappeared from society.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the same pattern that Hitler did with the Jews. Oh, we have to move them into camps for for our safety. They're unhealthy, unsafe. They carry disease. We need to remove them then they're out of sight, out of mind. Then they can be disappeared from the world. It's an old pattern, and we've seen it before. We know how this film ends.
The mandates on vaccinated, not being in public places.
That's right. We know this is an ideology. There's no science behind this. right? The vaccine mandates, there's no real medical science behind these things. The same with the climate, the carbon. Like, it's not possible for carbon to be a pollutant.
Right. Yeah.
Carbon is life on this planet.
Yeah.
And carbon dioxide is an essential part of the carbon cycle. Everyone in junior high school learns about the carbon cycle, right? This is life itself. More carbon dioxide in our atmosphere is unambiguously good for all life on this planet. There's no scientific question about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now they're demonizing nitrogen. Oh, carbon, now nitrogen. Soon they're going to outlaw the whole periodic table.
Yeah.
Right? And though that you might not know, I have a background also in fertilizer and in agriculture a little bit, there's also a nitrogen cycle. Okay? And nitrogen is essential for protein. Without nitrogen, there is no protein. Right? And yeah, nitrogen goes through this cycle. And the nitrogen, the 80% of our atmosphere that's nitrogen, it's unavailable in that form. Plants and animals, except for a tiny few, cannot convert gaseous nitrogen as exists in the atmosphere into protein in our own cells. But what happens in the breakdown of organic matter in the soil, right, there are various microorganisms in the soil that break down the plant proteins into more simpler forms primarily, and they enter what we call the soil solution, which is it seems strange, right? You think, what do you mean the soil solution? It's not always waterlogged. No, but there's always water. There's always moisture in soil. It adheres to all the little particles of the soil. And so, all of this moisture in the soil actually contains dissolved nutrients, right? That's what plants draw up through their roots. They draw them up in aqueous form through drawing up water through the soil solution. So the most common form of nitrogen in the soil solution is NO3, right? And we typically, now these change species very easily. It's hard to kind of measure and gauge this, but from NO to NO2 to NO3, a little bit of NO4, excuse me, in the soil, but most of it's NO3. This is drawn up into plants. Plants are able to combine the NO3 with H2O, water, with CO2 from the air, because plants can use CO and do use CO2 from the air, with the energy that they receive from sunlight, and they produce plant proteins.
Right.
And plant carbohydrates and stuff too, right? But we know this. This is the process we all learn about in school called photosynthesis. So there's a carbon cycle and there's a nitrogen cycle. So now they're demonizing nitrogen. Oh, we got to stop using nitrogen fertilizers. It's destroying our environment. This is ridiculous. This
Building blocks for life.
That's right.
There's too much of it.
This is not possible, what they're saying. As I said, if you eliminate what is impossible, like you cannot hang on to what is impossible.
Yeah.
So that's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the whole mass formation story is fascinating. And when you realize that, then you can start to kind of see this happening in all of these frauds. All of the frauds develop an ideology that leads to mass formation, that leads to greater totalitarian control, and that's the process.
Yeah. And again, coming back to first section, when you recognize that pattern, it becomes a lot easier for you to avoid believing in the narrative.
Yeah, you see the next one come along. You say,
Right.
okay.
Wait a second here.
I understand what's going on.
Might have been born at night, but not last night.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And so, a couple other things that Matthias Desmet says, very, very important. The consequences of mass formation are amazingly consistent. And one key thing he points out is that mass formation is not like hypnosis. It's exactly the same as hypnosis. Wow. Yeah. And all of us have talked to in the last year or two. We've talked to people that you just can't get through to them. You can't. He said this is one of the most fascinating characteristics of mass formation. Yeah. Is that people are no longer amenable to logic and reason.
Right. Yeah.
You cannot reason with them. The people who are caught in this, it's exactly like they are hypnotized. And all of us have seen hypnotized people, right? And we know you've seen like these stage hypnotists and
They'll
stuff.
behave like a dog. And
You're a dog, and they behave like a dog, right? And they don't realize it. Everybody's laughing at them, right? So there's their perception of reality is altered, so that they cannot perceive certain aspects of reality.
Yeah.
And they perceive certain fantasies as if they are reality.
Yeah.
We've all seen that in hypnotized people. That's exactly what goes on in mass formation. These people literally cannot perceive.
Right. You know, it's you mentioned Stefan Molyneux. I remember listening to a show where he talked about when people have that undying devotion to a specific ideology, that mass formation, they know it. It's not like it's something that they think might be true. It's like, it's fact, right? And when you attempt to challenge that, or if you in some way, shape, or form threaten their belief, they actually behave as if you're tearing their arm out of a socket, because it's so much part of who they are. Anything that goes against it, they feel is automatically an attack.
Yeah.
And that's why we get a lot of people who get really defensive when you start talking about how deep the corruption goes.
Yeah.
And people are like, oh, it's just a conspiracy theorist. And then they get all upset and all that. And you just have to recognize, okay, I'm not going to get anywhere here. And that's okay. I just have to recognize I'm not going to get anywhere here and move on. It's always fascinating to me how much it happens with the simplest things. How do we move forward? Like, we have all these things that are going on, but you have solutions as well that you present in your book, because we need to get past them. Like I talk about education system for sure, right?
Yeah.
We need to instill these principles and these wisdoms within the education system, so that when the next generation sees some would-be tyrant start the patterns.
We don't have to worry about the next generation. We got to worry about this generation. We got to worry about us. It's happening right now.
But this is the thing: we can't really save the now, in the sense that we can't change the education system and hope that this generation is going to make it. Like the damage, the irreversible damage that has already been caused, will make it where it's going to take an entire generation for a new mentality, one of integrity, to be something that the 16 and 17 and 18-year-olds have when they go into the workforce.
Yeah.
But
I touch on that in the chapter on communist subversion techniques. I think that's the first step, is because like once you've kind of indoctrinated one generation of students, people very rarely change their worldview after they hit about 20 years of age. They will carry on for the whole rest of their lives with those ideas, that worldview, as they gradually move into more and more powerful positions in society, as they naturally do when they get to their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they move into be, at the top of whatever their profession, occupation, or business happens to be. But let me just touch on another couple things. So,
sure.
Consequences of mass formation. So, one, as I said, is those who are hypnotized. You cannot reason with them. They cannot perceive on that level. Excuse me. And this is fulfilling a psychological excuse me, a psychological need or function within them, which is much more powerful than logic, facts, all the rest of it. He says that all in all the different ones that have been studied, about 30% of people become hypnotized. Another roughly 30% of people know that something, so I call them the true believers.
right.
Another 30% know that this doesn't make sense, something's wrong with this, and they speak out against it. Okay, those are the rebels.
Yeah.
That's us. Welcome to the rebel base, Luke. And then, sorry, I'm just getting over this bad cold, and it's still have a cough.
It's okay. We all get cold.
Sorry. And the other 40%, they're the fence sitters.
Mm-hmm.
They think, wow, this doesn't seem right, but they don't speak up against it.
Right. Yeah.
And he said, in all other cases in history, the 30% of rebels, he said they're a very mixed group. And they have never been able to come together
And unify.
as a unified
Yeah.
force.
Right.
But he said, if you could get the 30% of rebels to come together and bring with them the 40% of fence sitters, he said, the whole mass formation would collapse.
Right. Yeah. Overnight. Yeah.
But so that's who we have to look for. We have to look for those people who know something's going wrong, or those people who think something's not right, but they're so far unwilling to speak up against it. That's where we have to focus our efforts. And another important thing he said is, because that it works this way, ideology, mass formation, then leading to totalitarianism.
Yeah.
He says, you can never just go, it's not a question of there's just some bad guys. If we get rid of the bad guys, then we'll be
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Right? If the white hats come in and kill the black hats, we'll all be safe.
Right. Yeah.
No, it can't happen that way. Think back to what you know about Nazi Germany. If somebody had assassinated Adolf Hitler, what would have happened? Goering would have taken his place.
Yeah.
Somebody else, right? He was the deputy Führer, Goering. Somebody else would have simply taken his place. And so it is now. People have great hopes for Danielle Smith. Maybe. Personally, I'm not putting any hopes on that, because it's not simply a matter of replacing a few political leaders here and there.
Yeah.
Because you have too many people caught in this hypnosis.
Yeah.
And you will have thousands and thousands of people demand that we have mask mandates, demand that we have this, demand that we close the schools. Like, the only way you can stop this is to break the ideology.
Right. Yeah.
And the only way to do that is one person at a time, one soul at a time.
Right.
And we have to do that within ourselves. And another thing, and this is also a spiritual principle, but it's so practically true. The only person you can change is you.
Right. Yeah.
You can never change anyone else. We have an influence on all the people around us, obviously, but you can never change other people.
Still is
And
up to
that's,
them. Yeah.
that is the one of the root problems with totalitarianism, because totalitarianism, in all of its many forms, always seeks to force everyone to do what a certain small number of people think is what they should do, what they must. You must do this, you must not do that. Everything that isn't compulsory is prohibited.
Yeah.
Right? But you can never change people by forcing them.
Right.
You can only terrorize other people. And that's why communism is constant terrorism. And that's why we see this what's going on in the world, this cancel culture. This is terrorism. You can't say that. You must say this. You can't do that. You must do this. It's always trying to force other people to do what you think they should
Right.
do, or what I think they should do.
Yeah.
It cannot work, and it will end in mass murder. It always does. You can only change yourself. So the escape to freedom begins with yourself. Only you can escape to freedom, for you. The fascinating thing is that because what we do and who we are has an effect on the people around us, in fact, it's the only way we can affect people around us. The only way we can escape to freedom as a society is for you and you and you and you as individuals to escape to freedom. And that is, first of all, a battle. As I say, we're in a spiritual war, and spiritual wars are fought within. It's always an interior battle, never an exterior battle. And Solzhenitsyn realized this too. He said in many, many different quotes in many different places, he said, for example, I've learned that the line that divides good from evil runs through every human heart.
Ha. Yeah.
And it is. There is good and evil within every single one of us.
That's right. Yeah.
Every single one of us needs to turn to the light to turn away from darkness, to turn to truth, to turn away from lies. I say to turn to God, but you know, however you conceive God to be, in whatever way and along whatever path you choose, in truth, there are no wrong paths to God.
And yeah, as long as the intention, it goes back to the
along
Bible
whatever
talking-
path
yeah.
leads to love, because God is love.
Right.
If you think you're seeking God, that you think you're seeking spiritual enlightenment, and it's leading you somewhere other than love,
It's the wrong one.
You're on the
Yeah.
wrong road.
You've been deceived. Yeah.
You've been deceived again. And of course, there are many, many deceivers in the
Yeah.
world,
Yeah. Yeah.
and none of us know everything.
Well, especially, I mean, the perfect example is, you know, how the totalitarians, they recognize that if they can get us to be divided, where it's us versus them type of deal,
Yep.
they can maintain the state of anxiety a lot
Yes.
easier and inch their way towards the tyranny. But it occurs on the micro as well, right? Where we give away that power. You know, we give it away when we have that division be so prevalent. And you know, speaking to religions, yeah, even in the freedom groups, whenever there's division, you know full well that one's not for us, right? That one is not going to be in line with us advancing our consciousness because of all the division. We're never going to get anywhere if we're fighting with each other.
Yeah.
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 And tyrants know it.
Well, yes, exactly. I mean, it's the old empire building strategy, divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And it's being used against us all the time, right? Blacks against whites. I was just listening to Mike Adams, the health ranger. I don't know if anybody else listens to his podcast or his stuff, but he was talking today with the guest that he had on about, Mike was saying, you know, when I went to high school, you know, and I was on the track team and whatever, like we had blacks and whites and Asians and Filipinos and Latinos.
Yeah.
And like, he said, when I went to, there was no racism when I went to high school.
Yeah.
Like, how did all this racism come back? We got it out of America.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, these people are bringing it back. What's going on? And it's true. So the racism has been brought back. And we have the same thing in Canada. We don't have that many blacks, but we have native people, the indigenous people, and this dividing a wedge between them, dividing a wedge between people based on their sexual behavior,
Yeah.
dividing a wedge between people vaxxed and unvaxxed, classic,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? If you use too much carbon or whatever, you've got a big carbon footprint. Carbon footprint isn't a man. There is no such thing as a carbon footprint.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I know.
Because we expel carbon.
Yeah. We are the carbon.
Yeah,
And we are the carbon they want to reduce.
yeah, that too. That too. So I talk about that in the global warming chapter too.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring up, we won't get into it because we've talked so long already, but I also bring up a point that I don't know why no one has brought it up, but you know, as an economist, I've worked with mathematical models. I have some understanding and experience with mathematical models. And in economics, like we have mathematical models. Well, this is the day in, day out work of a working economist, which I'm not. But and the models aren't great, but they're good enough to be useful, like for a couple of important reasons. But what we have with the climate, there are no models. It's not possible to have a climate model. We don't understand the climate.
Yeah. We would have to have thousands of years more data to be able to say we have any idea.
Lack of data and lack of understanding.
Yeah.
See, we can make a model of the economy because we have a pretty good general theory of the economy. It's not fantastic, but it's pretty good. It's good enough to be workable. Yeah. And we are human.
We get the basics.
The economy is a feature of human action, of human activity.
Right.
Being humans ourselves, we can understand this complex system that we call the economy.
Right.
We don't understand it perfectly, but we understand it well enough to create equations to describe it. Because mathematics is really a language. So we can describe the economy in English and we can describe it in mathematics. And so a mathematical model is a system of equations. Right? Maybe not most of us, but some of us will remember working with systems of equations in junior and senior high school. All of us did that.
Yeah.
Okay, simple systems, usually two, right? Two equations and two unknowns, right? 4x plus 5y equals 7, and 7x plus 12y equals 21, right? It's a simple system, two equations and two unknowns. There's a unique solution for x and y, and you can solve this system for x and y. But with the economy, we have dozens and dozens of variables and equations. We can't possibly solve it with a pencil and paper, but we have computers that can crunch all through that.
Yeah.
But we understand, we can create a system of equations to describe in mathematics what we're able to describe in words. But when it comes to the climate, we don't have a general theory of the
Right.
climate.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not possible to create a system of equations that accurately mimics the behavior of a complex dynamic system that you do not understand.
Yeah.
Period.
Whatever you come up with is going to fall short of the truth.
It's
simply
not the
because
climate.
Yeah.
But
It-
also, the economy is man-made.
Yes,
The climate is not.
Right.
that's right.
How can we feel that we can understand?
If- Yeah.
I know,
If-
the other
if-
element of
if-
modification.
If we understood the climate nearly completely, then we could create a system of mathematical equations to describe it. But we don't understand it nearly completely. So it's not possible to have a climate model. And of course, the other one is the one you brought up, it's also in my book, that there's not nearly enough data to correctly parameterize
Right. Yeah.
a mathematical model of that scale.
Yeah.
So we don't have, so all these things that are called climate models, as I say, they are not climate models. They are complicated, quantitative methods of converting assumptions into fantasies. And so all the fear is generated from a fantasy. That's exactly what an ideology is. You use an ideology to generate fear that you then manipulate to get totalitarian control. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And with the climate, so all of these frauds, you touched on this earlier, and I distracted us for a bit. Okay, so where is all this leading? All of these frauds fit the pattern of totalitarian subversion, like you say, leading through ideology, mass formation to totalitarianism. Each of the frauds is carefully designed to grab control of a different vector in society,
Right.
you might say.
Yeah.
So all of these different frauds, and people don't realize they're connected. They're all connected. This says connecting the dots, creating a connect the dots outline. It's not a Rembrandt masterpiece, but we're looking at all this data in the world and we're not seeing a pattern, right? Going back to what I said at the beginning, we're not seeing a pattern. That's what a connect the dots picture is. Maybe our younger people have never done a connect the dots picture, right? There's all these dots on the page that make no sense. There's no image there. But as soon as you take your pencil and trace through and connect certain dots in a certain order, suddenly the picture jumps out at you. And you say, that's what it's a picture of. Now I see the picture. So what I'm doing, connecting the dots. You see the picture? So the climate fraud is meant to collect control of all energy. Energy is everything.
Yeah.
If you control all the energy, you control everyone. They're working towards, and they're very close to it now, controlling all energy in the world by controlling all people and companies through the use of carbon budgets. And it's tremendously helpful if what you're trying to control is scarce.
Right.
Oh, isn't that funny? In the last couple of years, we've stopped all drilling in the United States. They've stopped offshore drilling. They can't do, we've shut down pipelines. We've shut down plants. Now the Americans and the British have blown up to natural gas pipelines under the Baltic Sea, right? Which is causing a collapse of industries in Europe because BASF, largest chemical company in Europe and possibly the largest in the world, certainly one of the largest in the world, just a few weeks ago announced they're shutting down all their operations in Germany and they're going to move everything to China. They're all like the chemical industry is all based on natural gas as a feedstock.
Yeah.
No natural gas, you can't run your
Nope,
plants.
that's it.
I spent 20 years working in the fertilizer business. All of our fertilizer plants all around Western Canada, all over the world, they use natural gas to make ammonia, which is used to make urea. Ammonia is also used to make ammonium phosphate, ammonium sulfate. The only one that doesn't use natural gas is potassium, it's potash. But all of your nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur fertilizers require natural gas as a feedstock. Take away the natural gas, and most of the fertilizer plants in Europe are now shut down. Most of the metals smelting and refining operations in Europe are now shut down. The chemical companies are now shutting down. Europe is entering another dark age. This, once again, people will say, these leaders are idiots. No.
They know exactly.
No.
Doing. Yeah.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
All of these sanctions against Russia, and people say, oh, these guys are idiots. They shot themselves in the foot. They didn't know that it would hurt us more than Russia.
No.
They
knew it was going to hurt you, and that's why they did it.
That's exactly what they're intended to do.
That kind of ties in. I get emails a lot from people who talk to me either how stupid the politicians or how smart they are, depending on their flair, their taste. But you know, it's funny whenever they say that they're supposed to serve us. It's like, no, they're not. They are not there to serve us. And if you doubt that, and if you think for one moment that Danielle Smith is good, let me just remind you that she took the same oath of service that Rachel Notley did, which is to the Queen, or to the Crown. So no, they are not here to serve us. They never were supposed to. And it's ridiculous to think that they are here for our benefit. They aren't. They never were. And, you know, anyway, I'll let you continue that thought, because it's just, I'll get upset.
Okay.
And it's not my show.
Yeah.
I got rants for that.
Yeah, you're lucky. So let's go on then to solutions. I've touched on it a little bit. I mean, on a spiritual level, yes, we need to turn to God. I say, not everybody kind of understands or appreciates the term God. Use whatever term you want. The universe.
Please just
substitute your own.
Yeah, like please just be aware that there is another perspective with which you could look at this, and you could call it God, but you could also call it yourself if you just zoom out. Like just zoom out from the planet for a second. And first of all, you'll notice there are no borders. And there's no, colored nations or anything like that.
When you look from space, Canada is not pink.
Yeah, that's right. But when you can zoom out and you see yourself from that perspective, that's what we're referring to. You need to turn to a higher perspective, and for many people, especially in Western culture, that's God, because He has that higher perspective. Yeah. So we get what you're saying. Yeah,
and I say it in many places, in many ways. So the the God you seek is within you. Mm-hmm. Those of you with a Christian background you may remember the words of St. Paul. It says, "Don't you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, who dwells within you?" The Holy Spirit, which in Christianity we understand as what we might call a manifestation of God. We use the term that God in three persons, right? One of the persons of God. I think the word person there is silly, but it is within us. The God that you seek is within. It's within your own heart, and seek within. And you need to rely more on yourself. And responsibility is a big part of the message of my book. Because freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin. And
to the degree that you take responsibility is the degree you have freedom.
Absolutely. And we think people have our governments, they've taken our freedoms away. No, we've given it away. Yeah. We gave away our freedom with our responsibility. We say, oh yeah, we'll let the government do this. Oh, we'll let the government do that. We'll let the government do this. Government, do this for me. Every time we ask the government to do something for us that we could and should do for ourselves, we're giving away part of our freedom. Mm-hmm. And if you want your freedom back, take back your responsibility. But, I also point, since what we're facing is an increasingly all-encompassing totalitarian regime. And I say all of our Western countries, I've been saying for over 2 years that Canada is no longer a democracy. Democracy doesn't exist here. We have the form of democracy, but it's functioning as a dictatorship. In Canada, I call it the dictatorship of the Privy Council. Who's really making decisions? When all this COVID stuff started, it wasn't Parliament that was making decisions. We went for almost 2 years without a budget. That's arguably the number one responsibility of Parliament, is to control government spending. For 2 years, they didn't. The budget doubled or tripled. I can't remember the exact numbers,
Yeah,
but
750 up to 1.18 trillion.
yeah, just
Yeah.
and we
But-
just like printed 300 or 400 trillion or $1 billion, and it, like, just like there's no control. This is one of the prime responsibilities of Parliament. Parliament didn't make all these decisions. Our provincial legislatures didn't make decisions. Who was making all these decisions? It was mostly appointed people, not elected people. Okay, and I talk about this in the chapter on where I talk about what is the deep state. When we talk about the deep state, what is it really? How's it functioning? Because we don't really know the structure of world governments, but we can see how things are functioning. And I also was introduced to a British investigative journalist by the name of Ian Davis, who has come up with a really good kind of outline of how he said, this is how things are functioning. This is how policy is made and what's going on with, because that's normally what we think, that our Parliament decides government policy. But as we've seen with COVID, government policies are not actually set by national governments anymore. They're set at some level above the level of national government. That's what's really happening. So how's it really working? Not how does the structure of government look on paper, but how is it actually functioning? How is policy being? So we have, as it has laid it out, the policy formulators, policy enforcers, and policy distributors, and our governments are at the level of policy enforcers. So policy comes from higher up, comes down to our national governments, then the national governments pass the laws to enforce the policies that came down to them from higher up. And then we have policy propagandists. So this is the mainstream media. These are the fact checkers, right, that are all paid for by billionaires.
Not so much anymore. They're cutting them off, eh?
Oh, are they?
Yeah, they're firing them all. Facebook just fired 11,000 people, mostly from the fact check departments and the.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's
Oh, that's
expected.
fascinating.
It's actually expected that 70% of social media staff were either directly or indirectly related to censorship.
90% Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they realized this isn't working anymore because people have caught on to the fact that fact checkers are not really fact checkers; they're propaganda agents.
If you say something and you don't know whether or not it's true, but a fact checker says it's false, it's true.
yeah. Anyway, and then at the bottom of this hierarchy are all of us policy subjects. We're subject to the policies, but we have virtually no say in the policies. I don't know if any of you listening or watching have ever tried to change government policy. I've actually tried a few times to make some impact on government. Just like it's like beating your head against a wall. Like it doesn't matter how many, and the rallies we've had, the truckers, like, has this had any impact? No, not really.
But it goes back to what you were saying before. You know, all of the focus that people have been putting on when it comes to the honking and the going to the ledge grounds and stuff like that, they're still going after the people and not the ideology.
Yeah.
They're not looking at how do we shift our mentality. They're like, how do we just deal with the immediate problem, this thorn in our side named Kenny, you know, and that's the extent of their consciousness around the situation. Yeah. That's all they solved was Kenny.
Yeah, we got rid of Kenny.
That's it.
And then Scuttlebutt has it that we actually haven't really got rid of Kenny, that he's still kind of pulling the strings. Him and Stephen Harper are still pulling the strings behind the curtain, so to speak, like the Wizard of Oz back there. So who knows? We'll see. I think since you got us onto local politics here, I think we won't really see any true colors until after the spring election.
Right. Oh yeah, people are treading carefully right now.
I
They're
think,
they're just towing whatever line they possibly can. Yeah.
but so one of the things, so we're facing this totalitarian government all over the world, really. Now, what can we learn about dealing with totalitarian regimes and toppling totalitarian regimes? So I've drawn on the ideas of Václav Havel. He was the one of the leading dissidents in communist Czechoslovakia, and later became the first president of the free and independent Czechoslovakia after the fall of communism in Eastern Europe. He developed the idea that he called parallel structures. And Paul understands this very well. He's been talking about parallel structures for years. So when you have a totalitarian regime that controls all of what we call structures in society, they control the government, they control the police, they control the courts, they control all the professional associations, as we've seen with doctors. But they're also controlling all the lawyers, they're controlling the teachers, they're controlling, and of course the unions. The unions have been kind of under socialist control for decades and decades. So all of these, everything in society is controlled in some way or another. The only way around that is to leave that and build new structures, build parallel structures, build our new communities, as Paul's been doing, as all of us have been a part of at least one, maybe more than one, little community, freedom communities, independent communities, where we try to figure out all of these things. Okay, how can we transact business outside of the official structures? What can we use for a medium of exchange? How do we find people? How do people find employment? And how do we find people to employ? Like, how do we get food? How do we get all this stuff? So we need to build all of these parallel structures. And that's the next, that's an important part. At the end of almost every chapter, I have a list of what you can do now. Yeah, and in there is always kind of parallel structures. What can you do to build community? Protect yourself, build community, build parallel structures. Do not live by lies. Live not by lies. Seek the truth.
It's something too that I noticed in the outline that you gave me there on the book, that you touch on the favorite topic that I have, and that is freedom and how we already have it. It's not something we have to go and look for. We're not going to find it under a rock. We're not going to find it with a check mark next to somebody's name on a ballot. We're not going to find it, from some white hats that are going to save the day. We already have it. It's ours. Just reach out and grab it.
Yeah.
Expand.
One thing that came to me when you were mentioning that, Paul, is the idea that, we often think, the government has taken our rights. Yep. Well, when we understand rights properly, and I think they're more clearly expressed in the American document, like the
Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of Independence, and in their amendments to their Constitution, and I think they're more properly expressed there, because they were dealing with and trying to find a solution to oppression by tyranny. All right, the king, the crown.
Yeah, Canada doesn't have that set up because, it was set up by the tyrants.
Yeah, we didn't have
America actually.
We didn't have that history. We weren't founded in that way.
Yeah,
but it becomes quite clear when you look at the American founding documents that these are not what we think of as rights are not rights granted to people. They are restrictions placed on government.
Yeah.
For example, whereas in the Canadian Constitution, we said you have the freedom of religion. But in the United States, they say the government will make no law respecting religion. It's a restriction on the government. Yeah. The government cannot do this. The government cannot do that. So that's really the rights we have, we call them human rights because we have them by virtue of being human. No one gave them to us.
Right.
No one can give them to us, and no one can take them away from us. We have our human rights. What we need is restrictions on the behavior of governments.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to insist on.
Yeah, as easy as that. Well, thank you very much. For those of you who are online, if you have any questions, we're going to be probably just doing a little Q&A here. But if you have questions, just type them in the comments there, and I'll see it on the screen, and we can deal with them there. But questions from here for Donald.
Yeah, as soon as you ask people, you know, that you have an audience
know.
of people who are just itching in their seats. Oh, I want to ask a question. Then you said, oh, anybody have questions?
I've had that happen. Questions at the end, please. I know you want the questions. We'll do them at the end, and then at the end, everybody forgets their question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Let's talk about the
$30.
book. $30 for the book, okay?
A little expensive because it's such a big book.
No, you know what? People can eat it. People can eat it because they chose inflation.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, they went in and shuffled their feet like cattle into voting booths for how
Yeah.
many years?
Yeah.
They chose inflation, so therefore you chose the price of $30 for this book, okay? It wasn't him.
Yeah. Do you want me? I mean, some of the people who are watching online. Do you want me to leave some with you, Paul, so people can? Always, if you see people, you can tell me.
Well,
later.
yeah,
You can tell me
for
later.
sure. No, let's keep
I'm
a
also.
couple copies.
I will probably be also speaking at this meeting next Monday night. So if you're watching online, it'll be Monday the 28th, I believe, of November. If you want to learn about that, then email Paul.
Is that at the St. Albert one? Is
Yeah,
that
the
one?
St. Albert group.
Wonderful.
It's not actually in
Wonderful.
St. Albert, but yeah.
No, but yeah, definitely. Well, then I'll make sure to send it out to my list as well. I'll be there, and that way we can all congregate there. That'd be good. Good gathering.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Somewhere that you were publicly.
Yeah.
Oh,
website.
yes, of course, online. You can get it on Amazon, Amazon Canada, Amazon.ca. It's got a terrible price. They got the price of $40 or $41 on the book. They can't do currency exchange properly, I guess, at Amazon. They don't understand that.
40.
But it's, I mean, the US dollar price is $21.95, I think, which
Yeah.
current exchange rates, it should work out to about $30 Canadian, not $40 Canadian. So,
Right.
So they're overcharging you. Maybe try to buy it in the US. Or you can get it from my publisher, which is booklocker.com. So if you just type into your web browser, booklocker.com, and then when you get to their website, search my title, What the Hell is Going On? You'll find it. And you can
Awesome.
get, it's available there in paperback and in ebook. Amazon doesn't yet have the ebook version up. I don't know why it takes them weeks to do that. They'll eventually get it up. And I'm still working on the audiobook version that will be coming a little bit later.
Wonderful.
And are you available online somewhere?
Ah, yeah, thank you very much for pointing that out. My author website is cominghomespirit.com. Come and visit me, because like that's our spiritual journey. We came from God and we're ultimately going back home to God. That's our journey. And in the meantime, we're having a wonderful adventure.
I love it.
So cominghomespirit.com, type that in. There's of course links right there, both on the homepage and on my books page.
You got a
There-
contact page as well, so people can email you there.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, you can sign up to get my my blog post and
Perfect.
yeah.
Wonderful.
The dominant seeking power. Is it power for the sake of power? Like, what's the, and when you think of the limitations of power in your life, and George Soros is advanced in age, what's his game? Eventually he's not here. What is their plan with power? Is it just to have it while they're here?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. And you know,
Can you just repeat it? Because the people online aren't
yeah.
able to
So
hear
the
it.
question
yeah.
is about these people who are seeking power. I mean, like, how much more power does George Soros want? Right? Like these people who are like, this doesn't make sense. And you're absolutely right. This is so foreign to the ordinary person, so bizarre that it's almost unbelievable. It's very interesting. Many years ago, I was at a little presentation, speech, sermon, whatever, lecture, whatever it was, with former Archbishop of Edmonton. And he said something that really struck me, that's stuck in my mind ever since. He said, you know, we are not equally vulnerable or susceptible to all of the sins. All of us have a particular weakness. Some people have a weakness for gambling. For me, gambling is not too much of a thing. Some people have a weakness for money. Well, I've been broke almost my whole life, so I don't think I'm addicted to money. Be nice to have a little bit more, but anyway.
I've got a good saying: you don't have money problems if you don't have money.
Hey, that's a good point. Yeah. It's everybody else that has money problems.
Yeah, that's right.
Because they keep telling me, hey, pay up, pay up.
Yeah.
So very few people, and some people have a weakness for drugs. Other people have a weakness for alcohol, and have a tendency to become alcoholics and stuff. I've never been distracted by drugs.
Some people have a weakness for like peanut butter chocolate cupcake, little cups, Reese's peanut cups.
That's not a sin.
That's not a sin. That one's all right.
But anyway,
So it's
so
okay.
and it's often very difficult for those of us who don't have a particular vulnerability to understand people who do. I often think, like, how can these people get addicted to drugs? Like, why would you do that? This makes no sense. Like, what you've done is really stupid. Why are you taking these pills? Why are you injecting? Why don't you just stop? Same with cigarettes. You know what? I have never got into smoking cigarettes, and other people, they can't quit. They're addicted to cigarettes. For me, it's like, come on. I've known people who have quit. They quit. It's killing you. So it's very difficult for us to really understand somebody who has a vulnerability or weakness that we don't have. There are, I think, a rather small percentage of people who have a weakness for power. I don't. I couldn't care less. I don't want power. To be honest, I mean, maybe it's partly my stage in life, but I don't even really want to be around people most of the time. Actually, I'd like to go out on a quiet lake, paddle my canoe, and go fishing. Leave me alone in the mountains on a quiet lake.
Yep.
I'm fine. I don't want power over anybody. But there are a small percentage of people for whom power is everything. And those people, not surprisingly, tend to gravitate into positions where they have power over other people. And so why do we see so many psychopaths in government?
Because the power's there. Yeah.
So that's what it is. And you may have heard the expression drunk with power. And this is, well, let me touch on another spiritual aspect that maybe not many people are familiar with, but most of you listening have probably heard of our chakras. This is an understanding that comes to us from Hinduism, right? That there are within the human body 7 main energy centers called chakras, and they're numbered they basically go from our tailbone up to the top of our head, and the lower 3 are focused mainly on the physical world, the upper 3 on more spiritual, higher things. And so they say the 7th one in the middle is the heart chakra. And in some ways, it's the pivot between the body and the spirit. And that's where we have to move into individually and collectively. We have to move into the center of love. Right now, most people in our world, and our world in general, is dominated by a focus on the 3rd chakra, which is the chakra of power, relationships with other people, and power, prestige, that sort of thing, material wealth. That's where our world is focused on right now. It's going to focus on power, and so we need to shift that focus to a focus on love. The way we move, and I say this in the first chapter and the last chapter, focus mainly on the spiritual aspects of this war that we're in and what we need to do. Many of you will remember the famous saying of Albert Einstein. It's not quite what he really said, but anyway, that we cannot solve, or problems cannot be solved with the same level of thinking that created them. We are focused on the chakra of the 3rd chakra of power. We cannot solve the problems of the world on that level. We have to transcend that level and move up to the heart chakra, to the level of love. And when we begin to look at each other in the world, not as threats, the other people in the world are not all terrorists who are out to destroy us. That's not true. That's a lie. I've lived in other countries in the world. And everywhere you go in the world, you will find the vast majority of people just want to live their lives and be left alone. Just like every one of us wants to just be left alone to live our lives. Now, if we will understand that on a spiritual level, really, on a real level, we are all one. There is, well, I'm kind of getting off in a little bit of a tangent, but let me just say, so these people are drunk with power. The lower chakras, if you remain stuck in the lower chakra, so the first chakra is survival, food, shelter, clothing. The second one is largely sex. I'm really oversimplifying it, right? And the third one is power and relationships amongst people within society and stuff. If we remain stuck at that level in the lower three chakras, we will consume ourselves because there is no end. There is no satisfying the lust for food, the lust for sex, the lust for power. These lusts are insatiable, and they will destroy you unless you move beyond them by changing your focus to love and moving your energy up to the higher chakras. So these people, why do they want more power? Because the lust for power is insatiable.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, long answer to a short question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, comments saying, yep, thank you, great talk. And that's it. That's awesome. So thanks everybody online for tuning in. It's going to be available at that same link. So make sure you do share it. Like, subscribe, all that good news. And then, of course, earlier on, you heard all the ways you can get in touch with Donald and get his book. And again, thank you very much for coming. We look forward to next week where you'll be presenting in front of the larger group.
Yeah, it'll be more focused and shorter next week.
Yeah, awesome. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. God bless you all.
Woola.